For this unit, you're going to be doing two projects simultaneously, one called Full Spectrum and the other one called Oral Soundscape. You're going to be using the same project assets, and it really is centered around a color theme. So I've created a folder here on my desktop that you can see. It's called Color. Inside that, I've created separate project folders, one called Full Spectrum and another one called Oral Soundscape. Now, because each of these projects are sharing the same images, I've kept the images out here so that they're common to both of these project folders. So let's take a look at the first project folder. This is the one we'll start with, Full Spectrum, and currently it's empty. There's no project that's been saved in there, and eventually we'll see that. The images remaining external to the actual project folders. I sourced my images from pexels.com. I used red as my theme, and of course you'll have to create an account here. These are royalty-free images, and you want to start assembling your assets. You want this thing really being no more than a minute long, and you want to create a progression. There are really two progressions in this sequence. The first progression is color, and you want to go from a lot of the color to less of that color until you have very little of that color. So this is an example of where, if we look at this, we've got 100% coverage in red. This might represent about 85% coverage of red. This might represent about 75% coverage of red. Again, this might be around 30%, 20%, and so on. And I'm going to end up on an image like this, where it's only about 10% coverage in red. So you want the progression going from lots of the color to very little of the color. The next progression is going to be going in the opposite direction. You're going to go from very slow, meaning the images will stay on the screen for a long time, to very fast. So the images are flying by very quickly. And then the very last thing we're going to have in our sequence is a title card with the name of the color and your name on it. So let's begin. I've created an account, I signed in, I downloaded all of the images that I wanted, and then I put them in that images folder that we saw earlier. Let's just take another look. If we open that up, you can see all the images that I have assembled. So when we launch Adobe Premiere Pro and we're assembling our job, we can create a new project. I click on that. Now the first thing that it wants you to do is to select your media. And normally this is okay when you're working with video, because most video that's shot today is high definition or 1080p. However, we're working with images here, and sometimes those images can be 4K or larger. And if we start to select those images right away, it takes the very first image, it takes the resolution of that image, and it assumes you want to create a video at that resolution. The problem with that is it's exceedingly large, and a video project at 4K and above is extremely taxing on your system resources. It may slow your system down to the point where it might even crash. Now, what I want to do is select the media to create the project. I locate that. I've got my folder on the desktop. There's my color folder. If I open that up, you can see that it wants to select everything there, but I just want this one. So I'm going to open that up. It's automatically got everything selected. Now the way in which it works right now is the order in which you select everything, I'm just going to deselect all of these, builds a sequence. What do I mean by sequence? Well, we'll see that in a moment. But let's say I was to select this. So the way in which it works is we're going from high intensity to lower intensity of red, and it'll build a sequence, and we'll see what that is in just a moment, in the order in which we select the images. So I'm going to select this one first, this one second, and so on. And I will continue that progression. We'll take that, then possibly this, and you'll notice we're getting less and less red as we progress. Once I've done that, and I click Create, what it does is it generates a sequence, and you'll see it right here. It's importing the files, and it puts all of the clips that I'd selected in the order in which I had selected them. And you can see that there. Now, there's an issue here because it's created a sequence for me that, if I go to my project window, Project, it used that very first image and created a sequence at the resolution of that image. Now you can see down here it says sequence 01. Look at the difference in the icons. This is an image or piece of video, and this represents a timeline with little snippets on it. That's the symbolic representation of this. This is the timeline, and these are little snippets. I'm just going to use this control here, and I'm going to scale that so that we can see the snippets much larger. We can also scale them vertically as well. And of course, we can scrub along the timeline in this fashion. Now, the problem is with that sequence is that it's too high resolution, and it's going to slow everything down. So I really don't want to do that. But I just wanted to point that out, that we've set ourselves up for failure doing it this way. Simply because it's images. Like I said, if it were video, it wouldn't matter. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete that sequence, select it, and delete it. Notice that everything disappears from the timeline. I'm now going to create a new sequence. Now I could have done that while importing the file and just said create a new sequence without having selected any images. And this would have remained blank, and then I could have double-clicked in this area and imported our images in this fashion and just brought them in at this stage. As a matter of fact, let's just do that. Select all and hit delete. Let's just go back, and I'm going to create a brand new project. So under new project, I'm going to give it the exact same name, full spectrum. So we'll just be replacing the old one. And where am I going to be saving it? Choose location, go to the same area inside here. We'll choose that. And now, instead of selecting the media, I'm just going to say create. And it'll just create. It tells me the project already exists. Just replace it. And now it shows up blank. We haven't imported any media. So what I can do now is down here where it says new item, I can go to new item and say create a new sequence. A sequence is just literally a sequence of images or video or a combination of both. Now in here, what we want to do is go to AVC HD, and we open up. There are a number of formats for digital video in here, but we're using the HD form. Typically, we'd use 1080p at 30 frames a second. Now, if you've got a much older computer with limited memory and hard drive space, I'd strongly suggest downsizing and going to the 720p format. So you can choose this, 720p. The 30 means 30 frames per second. And you can even give your sequence a custom name. Let's just call it Edit Sequence 1. It's really just a list of edits. You can make multiple sequences within the same project where you have edited the same assets, perhaps in a different manner. And you can see the settings for our video: frame rate, frame size. It's 1280 pixels horizontally, 720 pixels vertically, at a frame rate of 29.97 or 30 frames a second. This will keep your project smaller and more efficient. Okay, so currently there's nothing in our sequence. It's just blank. Notice there's nothing in our timeline, but the timeline is now active and ready to receive assets. So how do we bring the assets in? Well, it's very simple. Just double-click anywhere blank in your project window and then locate where your assets are. There's my images, and I'm just going to select them all, Command A or Control A on a PC, and import them. There they are. Now I get to start dragging them one at a time into the window. I'll drag it in there, and it's just giving a baseline amount of time that this image will remain on screen. This brings me to the timeline. This means hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. Remember, there are 30 frames in a second. That means if I were to put the number 30 in here, it would move this thing right here. It's called the playhead or the scrubber to the 1 second mark. So let me just hit return. And you'll notice there's 1 second, there's 2 seconds, 0, 1, 2. Look what it did with the counter. It changed it to a 1. 30 frames is the equivalent of 1 second. If I wanted to move this thing to the 3 second mark, let's say I want it on screen for about 3 seconds, so I would just put in here 0, 3. Now let's do a little bit more, 3.5 seconds. Well, that would be 3 seconds, 15 frames. And it moves the marker to there. Now, currently it looks like our clip is 5 seconds long. Let's just see what that is. That really hangs on screen for a long time. So I want it to go to the 3.5 second mark. I'm happy with that. There's 3 seconds. You can also see as you're moving the scrubber head, you can see the second and frame count changing. So I move that until it's at 3:15. That's 3.5 seconds. And then I can just shorten the clip. The horizontal length of these clips determines its length in time. So we want these being fairly long at the beginning, and as we progress towards the end, these clips should get much shorter, meaning they're going to be on the screen for a lot less time. So again, I'm going to assemble the next one in my sequence, perhaps this, and this time I'm going to make this, if it's 3.5 seconds, let's make the next one 3 seconds, which means that we'll be on screen now for a total of 6.5 seconds. So I move that to the 6.5 second mark, 6:15. And we'll make that smaller. I'll go to my next image. Now, another thing before I go, these images are massive compared to my screen size at 720p. So we need to scale these images down. And the way in which you do that is move the playhead over the image, select the image so that it's highlighted like this, and then under motion, up here, in your effect controls window, if you don't see this window, you can always go to the window menu and activate effect controls. Then under motion, you will find scale. And all you need to do is scrub through this to the left or to the right, just like this. And you'll notice it scales the image up or down. That's called a transformation. It's a scaling transformation. You can also rotate your images, and you can also change their X and Y positions as well. So let's go to the next image, select it, and we're going to scale that down. I suspect we're going to have to scale most of the images down because they were all fairly high resolution to begin with. I'll bring in my next image, and now I want this one to be around 2 3/4. So right now we're at 6.5 seconds. Let's make that 8 3/4 roughly. I'll make this a bit shorter. Remember, I'm going to have to scale it. Although that looks pretty good, but remember, if need be, you can scale those images down. Now, here's a problem. I've just changed the scaling on this image, not on the image that we're currently seeing here. You've got to be really careful of that, because now I've scaled that image down previously and we can't even see it. So I'm just going to do Command Z, Control Z. Always make sure you're on the image with the playhead and the image that you want to scale is selected. And now I can scale that down. I'll go with this one now. And at this point, I'm just going to move with this scroll bar, move it along a little bit. I'm just going to play it by eye. In other words, I'm going to just look at the length of these things and just make a call by eye. Make sure it's a little bit smaller than this one. Move the playhead over, and now I need to select it and scale it down. Don't scale it too much or you get letterboxing. That's that black blank area on the sides or on the top. I'll bring in my next image. Again, just kind of playing it by ear. I'm going to use the scale tool. There we go. And I'm just going to scale that down, make it a little bit shorter. And we should experience that as a speeding up of the image duration on screen. So it starts off very slowly, and now we should see those images start to speed up as we progress. Again, select it, use the scale function to scale that image down. And you'll notice I'm scaling it down and it was taking its time to respond. You'll notice here, this is the render status. When it's yellow, that means we can preview the render. When it's in red, it means that it's still buffering or rendering. And so you may not see the transformation, or in the case where you've applied transitions between images, we'll get to that, they may not show, or any other special effects may not show until the condition of that bar is at least yellow. Scale that down. I'll bring another image in my progression. Possibly the raspberries should go. They should go there, actually. I'm just going to make that to here. Move that over. Move that back down in there. And make that a little bit shorter. So again, we've got the raspberries. They're exceedingly large. Let's scale that down a bit to about there. And now we move along. Go into these lamps. That's good. Maybe take this in. And I just continue along like that until I've got all my images placed in. Once we're done that, we'll take a look at transitions.